Former First Lady Michelle Obama is kicking off her book tour, and she's not holding back.
What candidates do you see out there that inspire you and catch your eye? And did you hear recently one of Hillary Clinton's former advisors is speculating that she could run again? Do you think she should?
I think at this point everybody's qualified and everybody should run. I was like, I might even tap Sasha. Sasha, you got some free time? I think you do a great job.
One thing Obama has made clear is it's not going to be her running for office anytime soon. But what impact does this memoir have on the Obama legacy and on the current state of politics, as she's openly talking about? Joining me right now is Desiree Barnes. She's a former Obama administration aide. Desiree, it's great to see you.
Great to see you too, Kate.
Thank you. You started working for Michelle Obama as an intern when you were 19 years old, and you went on to serve the president, the first lady, the entire administration. The reporting has always been that Michelle Obama was reluctant to have her family in the public eye. How do you think her time in the public eye has changed her view on politics when we hear her talking about it now?
I think she's been able to have an experience up close and a vantage point to a front row seat in history making. And I think that that's something that she's been very authentic and candid about with the audience that she's come across. And I think that she's not afraid to be honest about the trials and tribulations, that the hard moments have been hard, and that there's, optimism and hope that comes out of it. And she's been able to see how, government has been able to function when you have people who are willing to work with one another.
And the opposite, when they're willing not to work with one another, which we can definitely see sometimes. First ladies, they often don't talk about politics at all, particularly not taking on the current president. In her book, she talks about the birther conspiracy, saying she won't be able to forgive the president, President Trump, because of it. She's being asked about it in these interviews. Does it surprise you that she is taking on the president in this memoir in this way?
Well, I don't think that she's taking on, the current president. I think that, she's just being authentic to who she is. This is a part of her character. She's always been candid. And I think she's very comfortable with, the voice that she holds. And I think there's nothing wrong with her sharing her story and how she feels about things, and I don't even think that that's primarily her focus. I think this book is just to tell her story, and it inspires so many young women of color, especially.
And I wanted to ask you about that, Desiree, because she is candid about her personal life and her struggles getting pregnant, going to marriage counseling, and also how personally it hurt when the things people said about her during the campaign or tried to stereotype her in the campaign. She's clear that she wants to encourage and inspire people with her story, especially young African-American women. How would you say she's impacted your life from working for her?
I think that the best thing that I've been able to witness from her is her work ethic, and her commitment to serving others. But I think that this book is so great because it is candid, and I'm appreciative of it. I think a lot of people will be.
Great to see you, Desiree. Thanks for coming in.
Great to see you, too. Thanks, Kate.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Inside Politics.
Thank you, Kate, and welcome to Inside Politics. I'm John King. Thank you for sharing your day with us. The president launches a morning tweet storm at France. More evidence of a post-election mood, even his closest supporters described as dark and angry. Plus, the presidential venting includes fresh criticism of his Homeland Security Secretary. He says she's weak on border security. Officials believe Kirstjen Nielsen could be next on the high-profile list of administration officials sent for the exits. And Congress returns with big post-election challenges: government funding, the president's border wall. For Nancy Pelosi, decisions now will have a big impact on her campaign to quiet Democratic critics who don't want her to become Speaker come January.
If you're effective as a woman, then they have to undermine you, because that's a real threat. So I'm probably the target, more of a target than anybody except somebody who runs for president.
We begin today at the White House with a restive, angry president launching Twitter attacks on a key ally and weighing, we are told, upcoming changes to his cabinet and inner circle. The ally is France. The attack coming as the president apparently catches up with the harsh reviews of his weekend trip to Paris. Among his tweets, Quote, Emmanuel Macron suggests building its own army to protect Europe against the U.S., China, and Russia. But it was Germany in World Wars I and II. How did that work out for France? They were starting to learn German in Paris, the president tweeted, before the U.S. came along. Pay for NATO or not. That from the president. The Twitter rant coming as the president vents about the midterm election results and discusses more changes to his cabinet and his White House inner circle. Included, we are told, on the president's list, his own chief of staff, John Kelly, and Kelly's protege, the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kirstjen Nielsen. CNN's Jeff Zeleny is live at the White House. He's been doing some of this reporting. Jeff, we know the president's in a bad mood about the elections. Explain why he thinks some of his own team has to go.
Well, John, there's no question the president has been eyeing replacements, we're told, for all about everyone in the West Wing here and potentially in the cabinet for people who are not related to him. Now, of course, he's not going to replace everyone, but he's very open to replacing some people. So that is where his mindset is now. He's eyeing switching things up as he enters the halftime almost here of his first term in office. And one person he's been angry at for a very long time, this is not a secret here. He's made it publicly clear. He's been angry at his Homeland Security Secretary, Kirstjen Nielsen. He believes that she has not done enough to stop the inflow of a border crossing. So that is known. He was saying over the weekend and in recent days that he wants her replaced. Now, we don't know when that will happen, but one interesting thing here, as this is a potential domino-like effect, the White House Chief of Staff, John Kelly, is her biggest defender here at the White House. She was his deputy, his protege, as you said. So the question is, will John Kelly stay if she goes? There's some new reason to think that he will not. Some conversations here, at least at the White House, that he also may potentially leave at some point. Now, we should offer a lot of words of caution here, John. John Kelly has been, the rumors of his departure have been reported repeatedly over the last year or so, but this is something that would be a different moment. So we do know the White House is eyeing other potential replacements for him, but again, this is the president's decision. He will make these decisions on his own time here. But John, there will be new people in some of these posts when the new year begins. John?
Jeff Zeleny live at the White House with fresh reporting. Keep in touch, Jeff. If anything changes within the hour, with me in studio to share their reporting and their insights, CNN's Dana Bash, Rachel Bade with Politico, CNN's Manu Raju, and Lisa Lair of the New York Times. Let's start with this. It is typical after a midterm election for there to be changes. It's not so much that there are changes, it's how these changes are being considered. Jeff Sessions was fired. The chief of staff called him and said, get out today. You don't get to stay till Thanksgiving. You don't get to stay at the end of the year. You don't get to do this on your terms. Get out. Now the chief of staff and his protege, we know there have been headlines in recent days, I think we have some of them, about the president gets mad when he picks up and sees detentions are up or border crossings are up, and we know he starts venting, my Homeland Security Secretary is weak. I guess this is the way to put it. There's a way to do this if you think you need changes, and there's the president's way of doing this if you think you need changes.
Look, Kirstjen Nielsen, the Homeland Secretary, who's been there just under a year, of course, she took over, as you alluded to, from John Kelly. The two of them are very close. They worked together, for a long time. She was on borrowed time from day one. That was something that has been kind of an open secret in Washington, was reiterated to me this morning from a Trump source. And the question has been, how long can she last? In her defense, she is in a thankless job in that the president has expectations of his staff, particularly at Homeland, on fulfilling his campaign promises and doing things at the border that are, frankly, undoable, particularly without legislation, which is part of his job, and even without legislation. And she's tried, to her peril, to give the president what he wants rhetorically, and she had a blip of sort of a good vibe with the president, ironically, over the thing that maybe hurt her reputation more than anything, which is the child separation, going out there defending it to the nth degree. The president was supportive of that in the way that she did that, but that was not a long-lasting love between the two of them.
But they had problems getting high-quality people to come in the first 2 years.
Exactly.
Right.
And now they've had a midterm election where the Democrats have retaken the House. Some people will leave the White House to go to the campaign. Other people will leave because they're just exhausted or they have to get back to their families. They make more money in the private sector. How do you attract new people when this is how you get rid of the old people, by leaking about them. I want you to go, essentially encouraging you to resign because the president doesn't like to fire people. Among them, Wilbur Ross, the Secretary of Commerce, who since the election, even before the election, people have been saying the president thinks that he's not doing his job, that he lacks energy. So Wilbur Ross has a big event today, and of course you get asked this.
There have been news reports that have suggested that the president wants to replace you, possibly with Linda McMahon from the Small Business Administration. Where does that stand? How secure is your job, Mr. Secretary?
There is no stand. I'll serve as long as the president wants, and I have no indication to the contrary.
So you haven't talked to him about it recently?
I talked to him yesterday, but on trade issues.
It's just, it's how do you work? How do you,
I mean, it's true. You make a really excellent point. It does seem like a particularly thankless job, and I think the Department of Homeland Security is a particularly thankless job. And you do have to wonder why. I mean, we know the reasons why the president wants to make a change, why he hasn't gotten along with the current secretary. But, you know, he just spent the past several weeks talking about how there's a crisis at the border, how there's a caravan about to descend on America. And you would think that a different administration would want to keep that department very stable right now, you know, and make sure that people felt really secure, particularly given that you have a Congress that's not likely
and
to
the
act on
real
this issue.
difficult part for people who want to stay or to attract the new talent is you're going to be dragged to Capitol Hill and have to answer a lot of questions about very difficult topics that are going to put you in a lot of hot water. And not, in addition to all the turmoil and the chaos and the backbiting, the leaking, and potentially getting fired, not by the president, but one of his aides, but just having to deal with the subpoena threats and fighting that with the new Democratic House, that's a difficult task for a lot of
Case in point, he did, the morning after the election, fire his attorney general. Told him to get out, and get out today. He elevates his chief of staff, who's now the acting attorney general, Matthew Whitaker, on the House side, which in January will have subpoena power. You have Eric Swalwell saying this is an assassin brought in to kill the Mueller investigation. Now, we don't know if that's true. We don't know if that's fair to Mr. Whitaker. Let's see what happens as it plays out. You just had an interview. Democrats on the Senate side, they don't have as much power, but they have the same questions.
Certainly no significant action under Whitaker's authority should be taken at the department. We're going to push very hard through a variety of different approaches because this is a bottom line question. This is a question about whether Donald Trump is above the law.
Now, they don't think the appointment is legal. There's going to be a dispute. The lawyers will handle that, just like they seem to handle everything after the elections. The lawyers will get involved in that. But then there's the question of, you know, is he being brought in to somehow rein in or quash Mueller?
Yeah, and how do the Democrats respond? One thing that I was trying to push Wyden on was, well, how far will they go to demand to protect Mueller legislation that passed the Senate Judiciary Committee that would make it harder to dismiss a special counsel? There's some talk among the Democrats to add that to a must-pass spending bill to avoid a government shutdown that needs to be accomplished by early December. Wyden would not go that far. Other Democrats would not go that far, risking the threat of a possible shutdown. So there's going to be a lot of talk at the moment. What they can actually do is a different question.
And the person making these decisions, the President of the United States, is described by even his closest friends as in a foul place right now. They say that despite his public statements that the election was a complete victory, he gets that it was anything but, that the House is going to have subpoena power, that the House is going to investigate, that the House is going to not want to fund his border wall, that the House is not going to question all the deregulation, that everything the president is for, the House is now going to question and be against most of it. This morning, as he ponders, apparently he's catching up on the DVR and the reviews of his weekend trip to Paris, one of the things he did was decide not, because it was raining and he would have to go by car instead of helicopter, to go to a ceremony to honor World War I American heroes who died on European soil. The president decided not to go. He was criticized for that. Some of his own advisors were steamed about that. He tweets this morning. By the way, when the helicopter couldn't fly to the first cemetery in France because of almost zero visibility, I suggested driving. Secret Service said no. Too far from the airport, big Paris shutdown. Speech next day at American cemetery in pouring rain. Little reported fake news. Misspelled cemetery once in there. It's just a simple fact. The Secret Service does not say no to the president. They raise concerns if they have security concerns. They lay out the logistics. The president has the right. I've followed presidents into housing projects and into crowds when the Secret Service has said, please don't. It's up to the president. So that's a farce.
Yeah, and it seems like clearly he maybe is having regret about the fact that he didn't go to this ceremony. I mean, veterans are a key constituency that he's been trying to reach out to. He always talks about rebuilding the military and making that a top priority. The fact that he skipped this, clearly he got a lot of criticism, so he's trying to get out of that. And I do think it's telling, you know, John Kelly going to this ceremony, and then the next day or within 48 hours we hear that, you know, Kelly is once again being thought of, he's thinking about pushing him out. So, you know, clearly he's ticked at
Well,
Kelly
Kelly is clearly diminished. I mean, the point I don't understand about the cemetery is maybe the president was in a bad mood, maybe the president didn't want to spend a couple hours in the car. Who is the person at the White House? Is there nobody who can say, Mr. President, do you understand how good this is for you? Do you understand the optics for you? Walking through this cemetery at this time, in the rain, even makes the pictures better, if you will, that you did it.
And even worse, there may have been somebody behind the scenes saying the opposite. Don't worry about it. You're going to go to other cemeteries. You can miss this. I'm told that your instinct is right, that the president does have regret. Doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that, given what he just tweeted going on the attack on this issue, because he clearly is catching up on the news about him and about that trip. But it does speak to the broader question about who is there. And it doesn't seem like a big stretch to get from that particular mess. And it was a mess. It was a structural mess. It was a management mess, not to mention a public relations mess, to I need to fix things. Because he was already on that path, and this just emphasizes that for him in his head.
So the tweet doesn't fix it, nor does saying they were learning German in France during the World Wars until the Americans came along. That doesn't fix things either. Up next, Arizona flips. Florida keeps counting. The midterm balloting ended a week ago, yes, but the map isn't filled in yet. The president's words from November 7th, when he thought he would have 55 Senate Republicans. Quote, the Republican Party defied history. Now the changing math has made the Senate map look quite dramatically different. Arizona is blue. Mississippi headed to a runoff. And the president has turned to peddling conspiracy theories about the Florida recount. When will Bill Nelson concede in Florida? The president tweeted just a few minutes ago. The characters running Broward and Palm Beach voting will not be able to find, in quotes, enough votes. Too much spotlight on them now. A Florida judge, for the record, said he's seen no evidence of fraud. Ditto for the state's top election officer, that would be the Secretary of State. Rather, the source of the Sunshine State drama is a tangle of lawsuits and some counting hiccups, without a doubt. Tampa Bay Times political editor Adam Smith joins me now. Adam, we're watching this from afar. Any idea, will they be able to meet the Thursday deadline, or are they too far behind?
Well, I think we're talking 67 counties, and it's a good bet that at least 65 will, and it's those two counties, Broward and Palm Beach, that just don't seem to be able to get their act together, and they could tip over that deadline.
If you look at the history of recalls, most people would say there's no way the votes are out there. You understand the state a lot better than we do here in Washington. Are there enough votes out there in all these lawsuits? Are they legitimate questions being raised, or just sort of the ghost of 2000, people making sure they have place markers in court in case they need to go there?
Yeah, I think it's the latter in terms of the court cases. You know, the votes are theoretically out there, but it's a stretch. I think the hope of the Nelson people is that you've got these undervotes in Broward County, 20, 30,000 undervotes that the machine messed up on and didn't count. And once they look at them, you'll actually see votes. So that's a leap, but it's conceivable.
A leap, but conceivable. And will that be determined in Broward County, or is that a question if you have paper ballots and you're saying somebody marked it, the machine didn't count it, is that going to end up back in court?
I think what I could see ending up in court is the deadline, because once this machine, the deadline for the machine count comes Thursday, then they've got so little time to do these hand recounts of the votes, of the ballots that are either undervoted or overvoted, and I could see them bump a bunch of counties bumping up against that deadline, and then it becomes a big fight, sort of like 2000 was, in terms of should the counting continue.
Sort of like 2000 was. Thanks for that, Adam. We'll leave this conversation there, but if it's sort of like 2000, I suspect we'll have a few more in the days and weeks ahead. Appreciate your insights, Adam. Let's bring it into the room. This matters, number one, because you should count votes and you should have elections people can trust. Number two, it matters because if Florida swings, the president thought when he had his big post-election news conference, Montana was going red. During his news conference, it was called for Tester. He thought Arizona, the Republican, was leading then. Now it's blue. Florida and Mississippi are on the board. If Florida were to somehow change, then the Republicans could come out of this at net zero. possibly if Mississippi then went in the runoff at -1. Most people think the Republicans are going to come out of this +1, maybe +2. But
look, I mean, it does. Either way you look at it, it's not the narrative that the president and Mitch McConnell were pushing the day after the election, that this was a very good day in the Senate. I mean, the map for the Republicans coming into this cycle was one of the best that they have had in a very, very long time.
Ever.
10, probably ever, yeah. 10 Trump states that Trump won, 5 in very red territory. And remember, they started off the cycle with a 52-48 Senate. Then they lost that 1 seat in Alabama. So for the cycle, at most, they're going to be +1. They have a 53-47 Senate. So if you're the Democrats, of course you want to be in the majority, but you look at the 2020 map, there's a good chance of them taking back the Senate then.
And so the president is saying in emails from his campaign trying to raise money, in tweets, stolen, fraud, crooked, crimes. Listen to one of his top White House aides trying to agree with the president without exactly agreeing with the president.
There's always concern about voter fraud. And so I think the key is obviously that in conjunction with state, working with the federal government to make sure that this doesn't happen. But we always have to keep an eye on it because one of the greatest rights that we have and privileges is that of voting. And we need to ensure voter integrity at the state and local and federal level.
The president didn't say we have concerns about voter fraud, or we're going to keep an eye on just in case to make sure there isn't voter fraud. The president, with zero evidence, said there is voter fraud.
Right, this is a strategy that we've seen the president use before, of course, after his own election when he
won.
When he won, but he didn't like the margin, so he started talking about voter fraud in California. My favorite thing he said was when he said that the election officials should let Election Day stand, which is kind of like, well, you're up in the 5th inning, so why play the full 9? Let's just call it at 5. Exactly. I mean, this just isn't how elections work, and I think it's actually really detrimental for our electoral system because, in fact, there is no evidence of fraud. They've had various government entities in Florida investigate this. Nobody has found any evidence of fraud. There's evidence of mismanagement, perhaps, particularly in Broward County, but not of fraudulent ballots. So what you're doing is really just weakening confidence in the entire, election process, which really benefits neither party in the end.
But he thinks it benefits him. He clearly thinks it benefits him, and he was trying to keep his base fired up about a fight in Florida, in my view, because he doesn't want him to look at what happened, which was a blue wave in the House. Republicans won North Dakota, Indiana, and Missouri. They should have won those seats 6 years ago. They got them back this year, the Republican states. And now we have in play Mississippi, where an incumbent, she's an appointed senator right now, but an incumbent Republican senator said, she was invited to an event, and she said, quote, if he invited me to a public hanging, I'd be on the front row. A Republican senator from the state of Mississippi said the words in 2018, if he invited me to a public hanging, I'd be on the front row. Cindy Hyde-Smith now, you would think, trying to explain this? Not really.
We put out a statement yesterday, and we stand by that statement. Put out the statement yesterday, and it's available, and we stand by that statement. I put out a statement yesterday, and that's all I'm going to say about it.
At least
I put out a statement yesterday, and we stand by the statement, and that's all I'm going to say about it. I put out a statement yesterday.
The statement was, I used an exaggerated expression of regard, and any attempt to turn this into a negative connotation is ridiculous. Which, no, that explanation is ridiculous. If this back in the day, the day that most of us hope was sealed in a vault and sent away, was an exaggerated expression of regard, you could say something like, I used a term I heard a lot in my youth and I'm horrified. I'm sorry if I offended anybody. Oh, my God, I'll never say that again. But instead you say, I put out a statement. And I just want to note, she's running in a runoff against former Agricultural Secretary Mike Espy, former Congressman Mike Espy, an African-American Democrat. The state population is more than a third African-American. nobody would think that the Democrat has a prayer in Mississippi. But I give you Alabama Democratic Senator Doug Jones to put on the table. Is it possible?
Look, the fact that she wouldn't even repeat that statement, which, as you said, fell short by any stretch of the imagination. She doesn't
You're way more polite than I am. Thank you.
She doesn't want it to be. She doesn't want a soundbite. She doesn't want. It's okay for you to read it, but she doesn't want that soundbite. Why? Because she's going to go into a runoff, and she doesn't want her base depressed. That is a sad statement. It pains me to utter those words, but that's the political reality. And what she might be doing is what you alluded to, John, firing up Mike Espy's base, who might have just been like, all right, well, it's Mississippi. There's no way he'll win in a runoff. Well, if you keep that up, maybe he could.
And let's keep in mind the broader context, too, because Republicans right now, when it comes to issues of race and racial tensions right now, they are having clearly a big problem right now with Trump in the White House making controversial comments, post-Charlottesville, et cetera. But also Steve King, who just a couple of days ago was caught on mic saying, basically equating immigrants to, quote, dirt. And again, GOP leadership, Steve Stivers, the chairman of the NRCC, he got in trouble privately when he came out and said Steve King's comments were, unacceptable. No other GOP leader said anything about it. So the party right now has a big problem, and this just highlights them letting something like this stand.
But it's Mississippi, and Roy Moore in Alabama was a really, really troubled candidate. I mean, there were all these accusations that he had behaved like in sexual ways with young girls. So it's still really, really hard.
And National Democrats have sat out of this race so far.
We'll see if they do, see what happens to that. But to that point, good for Steve Stivers, number one. Putting principle, pride over power in politics. And we'll see.
Suburban districts.
He invited me to a public hanging, and anyone who says that's a negative connotation is ridiculous. No. Bad answer. Up next, they may be lame ducks, but lawmakers are back on the Hill today with a heavy workload and plenty of drama. Congress is back today, and it's a mix of post-election meet and greet and huge challenges. Newly elected members who take office in January are here for orientation. That's always fun. But the current Congress, including members who just lost their seats, have a weighty year-end agenda. The government needs a new spending bill by December 7th. The president demands billions in border wall funding in that plan. And don't hold your breath, but remember on the campaign trail, he also promised a post-election plan to cut middle-class taxes. Plus this bipartisan surprise. The New York Times first to report presidential son-in-law Jared Kushner and a bipartisan Senate group have a prison reform deal that would shorten and reduce the use of some mandatory minimum sentences for nonviolent offenders, eliminate a regulation that triggers longer sentences for use of a gun in connection with the initial crime at play, and retroactivity extending reducing sentencing disparity between crack and powder cocaine for some convicted offenders. Now, Kushner presents the plan to the president today. The challenge on the Hill, help me those of you who wander the Hill, is Mitch McConnell has apparently said, you proved to me you got the votes, I'll bring it to the floor. Is there, in 2018 Washington, after this election, going to be an actual bipartisan significant achievement?
The question is, does President Trump support it? That's going to where it's going to ultimately come down, because the president's going to face pressure from both sides. He did have his former Attorney General Jeff Sessions who was opposed to this. Well, that's not an issue anymore. But there are some voices in his ear who probably will lobby against it, like Tom Cotton, who is very concerned about this.
You mentioned Tom Cotton. Just let me interrupt you for a second, because this is what he wrote in August. Under no circumstances should Congress cut mandatory minimum sentences for serious crimes or give judges more discretion to reduce those sentences. That foolish approach is not criminal justice reform. It's a jailbreak. He goes on there.
Yeah, and the question is, there will be some Democratic senators who believe this is too tough, so they want to go further. So is that coalition there to get it through both chambers? It's going to take a lot of presidential leadership. So the question is, does Trump want this?
The one plus on the positive side of the ledger of getting this done is he's probably going to have Lindsey Graham as the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, who is very much for prison reform, criminal justice reform, and even people like Dick Durbin, who he's worked with Lindsey Graham, again, one of the top Democrats in the U.S. Senate. Also, remember last week, Chris Christie was at the White House? You know what he was doing? He was having a meeting on prison reform. Can you imagine, only in this Trump Shakespearean world would this happen? Chris Christie, who put Jared Kushner's father in jail when he was U.S. Attorney in New Jersey. Imagine he gets the AG job, works with Jared Kushner on criminal justice reform. It could happen, folks.
And there's peace in the Republican Party at last.
The world turned upside down.
I do think, look, Democrats have the House. Their margin looks better than they had once expected in the Senate. I think there will be a real question about whether the liberal Democratic senators think, like, let's just hold out and maybe, they can get a better deal on this in the new Congress. So that's also another dynamic there at the top of the president.
The House has a version of this bill that only does prison reform and does not reduce mandatory minimum sentences. But from my understanding, the only reason why it doesn't go that far is because they were concerned that Trump would say, this is weak on crime, I need to look tough, and we are not going to pass something like this. So I do think that there is bipartisan appetite in the House, and that it could very easily clear if it moves to the Senate.
So the question is, can you do it? We can put up the calendar. They're not here very much. They got 4 weeks to the end of the year, and they're only here usually about half the week when they come through. They have to pass the government spending bill. You see the dates there, the working dates, the legislative dates there. They have to pass the government spending bill. The president said during the campaign, when he sort of bit his own tongue and accepted the last temporary spending plan, that he was prepared to shut down the government if he didn't get his full border wall funding. Mm-hmm. That's still operative?
I think the question here is, what do Democrats do, honestly? Because, of course, Republicans are going to push for this in both chambers. I think that in the Senate, I've heard that there are some Senate Democrats who like a lot of the other appropriations packages, and so they potentially want to do some sort of deal. But House Democrats right now, specifically a lot of those that were just elected, they want to hold a line right now. They do not want to do a sort of deal and give Trump his $5 billion border wall financing. So I think we could see Democrats potentially fractured in how they handle this situation.
Yeah, and remember, there's $1.6 billion that was approved by the Senate. There's a bipartisan deal in the Senate for $1.6 billion.
Right.
Trump wants a lot more than that. Will he be satisfied with something in between? Will Democrats be satisfied with something in between? We don't know yet. The president may want to fight this very hard, knowing that it's going to get a lot harder for him in the new Congress.
I think politically it's really hard for Democrats because the president made this election a referendum on immigration, on the border wall in the final weeks. So these Democrats are saying, well, look, we won. So why do we have to give in on this issue? And if, they were to give in on this issue, is that, sort of negating the promises that they made to their voters? So I think it's really tough for them, particularly in the House.
To that point, they also know it steams him, and when he gets steamed, that's what helps the Democrats with these suburban voters. So there may be the campaign may not be over. It's just a possibility. Up next, Michelle Obama weighs in on the current crop of 2020 contenders, and one possibility, she says, maybe right under her own roof. Topping our political radar today, the Defense Secretary, James Mattis, says there's been states should slap them on foreign car makers, a topic of discussion at the White House today. President Trump taking up that issue with his advisors after studying the impact such tariffs would have on national security. He previously cited national security concerns to justify tariffs on other foreign goods. In the trade war with China, meanwhile, Vice President Pence telling the Washington Post, brace yourself, the administration ready to, quote, more than double the tariffs already imposed on Beijing, unless the Chinese government makes major concessions on an array of economic and trade issues. And the last First Lady says the current First Lady seems content with going it alone, without her advice anyway. In a new book, Michelle Obama says she told Melania Trump help was just a phone call away if she ever needed it. Extending a courtesy, Mrs. Obama says Laura Bush offered her during that transition. Mrs. Obama telling ABC Mrs. Trump, though, hasn't called or reached out. She was also asked on Good Morning America who she'd like on the Democratic ticket in 2020.
I think at this point, everybody's qualified and everybody should run. I was like, I might even tap Sasha. Sasha, you got some free time? I'm going to be looking closely at who handles themselves and each other with dignity and respect, so that by the time people get to the general, people aren't beat up and battered.
I don't have my Obama birthday book at hand, but I believe Sasha's still too young, correct?
Yes.
Correct, 35?
And good luck with that hope of not having these candidates tear each other
apart.
apart.
I remember 2008. It wasn't exactly a walk in the park when she and her husband were
an argument.
battling
Some
Hillary
Democrats
Clinton.
will make the argument.
It's the nature of the beast, unfortunately.
Right. Some Democrats will make the argument that had Hillary Clinton been beaten up a little bit more, she might have emerged a slightly stronger candidate, that there's a benefit to those attacks because it prepares the candidate for the general in some regard.
Yeah. You don't think Bernie Sanders beat her up enough?
No.
She ignored those attacks. Maybe she should.
Okay. What's your list? 30, 40? Never mind.
150 right now.
150 Democrats? Okay, that's the debate list. We're going to start from that list and winnow it down. Up next, the races that still have not been decided 1 week later. And before we go to break, check out the Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer posting a picture of his visit with the newest Democratic senators, the Republican pickups, Arizona and Nevada. Midterm election 1 week ago today, but we're still counting, not just in that Florida Senate recount, but also some House races still out. Those of you who know your civics will understand there's something missing here. Here's what we've called so far: 225 seats for the Democrats, 200 for the Republicans. What's missing? 10, right? There are 435 House seats. There are 10 other races where people are ahead, but we haven't called them yet. As it now stands, if they ended the way they are now, it would be 231 for the Democrats, 204 for the Republicans. That would be 39 Democratic pickups in Republican districts, only 3 flips for the Republicans that way. Well, let's take a quicker look at these 10 districts. Let's just bring them out here. First, let's just take a look at them. One of the things that makes it interesting, these 10 districts, they're from coast to coast. You have a Republican trying to hold on to a seat in Maine, Republican trying to hold on to a Republican seat, not incumbent in Georgia, a couple out here for Republicans in California. I'll stretch it out a little bit. A couple for Democrats, 3 for the Democrats in California. What makes this interesting as you look, as we continue to count the votes a week later, is that if you just bring this back out, which of these seats would be pickups? Of the seats Republicans are now leading, they're Republican seats. Democrats have a chance, if the vote total holds, to pick up at least 6 more seats. These are 6 Democrats leading. Let me bring the East Coast back in. 6 Democrats leading in districts currently held by Republicans. So Democrats had a big day last Tuesday. They have a chance to build on it as this plays out. At least 6 more potential pickups for the Democrats as we continue to count the votes. And as we do, this programming note, votes are still being counted in critical midterm races. So CNN will bring you tonight, Election Night in America continued as we continue to count the votes here. That's tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern. And when we come back, some freshman members of Congress facing serious Pelosi pressure, you might call it. Their calculations and hers next. The fresh faces of Congress get their first taste of Capitol Hill today. Its new member orientation begins. The new Democrats can expect some quality time with Nancy Pelosi and some aggressive lobbying from Pelosi allies who say she is the best choice to be the next speaker. Congresswoman Lois Frankel put it this way to Politico: I think it would look ridiculous. We have a pink wave with women who've brought back the House. Then you're not going to elect the leader who led the way? No, that would be wrong. But many of the new members are on record saying they would never vote for Pelosi for Speaker. As Pelosi works this new math challenge, remember, she's the only woman ever elected to be Speaker, and she's guided by earlier battles to rise up.
When people said, oh, a lot of the women are supporting Nancy to run, and they said, well, why? Do the women have a list of things they want us to do? Why don't they just make a list and give us the list? This is the Democratic Party in the year 2000.
And that was the men saying, why don't you just get a list from the women and maybe we'll do some of the things they want. So she's done this before. Does she understand this is a little different?
Oh, yeah. Yes, I mean, I think so. You know, we've all talked to her. I went with her to Baltimore, where she's from, where it all started, where she grew up, for this series, Badass Women of Washington. And yes, she understands it's different. It's a different time. It's a different climate, that there are so many people who ran against her. She didn't say this. This is me making an observation right now. Isn't it interesting that Nancy Pelosi, who has, you know, maybe close to a new 40-seat pickup, is being questioned about whether she should stay as a leader in the wake of her victory, and Chuck Schumer, who had losses, nobody's questioning whether he should stay there? It's really noteworthy, and I think, and look, I think that there's definitely a gender issue here.
And I think that's the argument that her allies are already making. I mean, they're saying that, look, she had been attacked throughout the country, all this money dumped on her. Look what happened. It didn't work. There's no reason to remove her. Now, the question is, you know, we're all doing different whip counts to determine whether or not these people who voted no, we about 23 members, both current and incoming, have said they vote no on her on the floor. Now, the question is, will they actually do it when it comes time for that actual floor vote in January? That's a big open question. A lot of belief that a lot of them will not do that and ultimately vote for her.
In Pelosi right now, the way she's sort of getting at those people is she's reaching out to folks who supported these candidates financially or otherwise when they were actually running, and getting them to sort of do this whisper campaign, like, you know, Pelosi's probably going to be Speaker, you know, tread carefully, you know, you don't want to be in her bad graces, etc. You could potentially get committee assignments. For example, Emily's List supported a whole bunch of Democratic women who were elected on last Tuesday, and the leaders of Emily's List are currently reaching out to some of these candidates, including candidates who said they will be no on the floor. So, you know, it's just like it's a whipping effort, both from Pelosi, but also her antagonists right now are trying to get these candidates to sign a letter so that they can put something out publicly saying she doesn't have the votes right now. I mean, I think everybody says, don't bet against Nancy Pelosi, but it's definitely going to be a different sort of race than she's ever had before.
And clearly something needs to be done about the Democratic Party bench in the House. Like the party needs to find a way, and I think that's something they are looking at, to get more younger members involved, and that's something that a lot of the members out in the campaign trail talked about. So that could be a way of appeasing some of those Pelosi.
Right. Is she part of some solution that jettisons her current number 2 and number 3, or do you bring in a number 4, 5, and 6 and promise them they'll move up quickly? That's the calculation. That will depend on the math. I want to just play a little bit more from your interview with her, because one of the things she does not lack is confidence.
I have a broad base of support in the country, financially, politically, and otherwise, which is valuable to our caucus. None of us is indispensable, but some of us are just better at our jobs than others. I want women to see that you do not get pushed around, that you don't run away from the fight.
Sometimes you play one card at a time in a fight. She's playing a lot of cards right there. I raised the most money. I have other support around the country, and otherwise. You mentioned part of this. Would you like to be on Ways and Means, or would you like to be on the Committee on Widgets?
That is one of the can't downplay that. That is probably the most significant thing for a lot of these members coming in. She makes those decisions about where you sit and how you ascend within your caucus, and whether you're going to be effective or not. And that's why people are not voting
It is old
against her.
school politics, and she knows how to play it. She says she learned how to count votes from her father, who was a congressman, and then the first Catholic mayor of Baltimore. And she never
lost. Index cards?
She does not have the index cards.
The new age, the digital age has ruined everything.
She said she doesn't. I asked.
But also, just going back to the segment you just did, I mean, there's a whole bunch of House races that are still uncalled, and Democratic leadership thinks at least half of them are going to go for Dems, which totally grows her margin. She might be able to lose as many as 20 members on the floor. And I was talking to somebody who has voted against Speaker Ryan on the floor just a few hours ago, and he was like, you cannot underestimate or understate how difficult it is to vote against your party, and there's a lot of pressure. And this is coming from somebody who doesn't like Paul Ryan, who is not. It's just a lot of pressure.
And if her votes are assured, it's going to be much harder for those votes to go vote no, because she